Good afternoon to all participants, both online and in class. Today we will have the pleasure to listen to three lectures related to the last mandatory course of Feminist Judgements. And I want to pay your attention to what's going on tomorrow, because due to the postponement, you know that we had to make a significant delay. We also had to accommodate to revise the agenda because our professors currently have many examination terms completing the academic year and classes. So tomorrow the first week was proposed to be only the lectures to be held only mandatory ones and in the afternoon. However, tomorrow morning we will have the mandatory mandatory workshops, one related to theoretical methodological preconditions or the meaning of feminist approach, and another one related to gender equality legal clinic, which will be in the future held within the Law and Gender Master's program. And in that workshop we will have presentations of our distinguished professors Ivana Krstić and Bojana Čučković, which will deal with something very similar or closely connected to the nowadays course. So they will speak about feminist judgments, case law, and you will see. So tomorrow morning we start at 10 o'clock. And in the afternoon we have the first optional course, Business Law and Gender Equality. So please look at the agenda, do not forget, and see you tomorrow. Now I will give the floor to our Professor Ivana Krstić for the first lecture on feminist judgments, and then Professor Tanasija Marinković will go on, and Professor Ivana Krstić will hold the third lecture, and then the discussion workshop will complete the work today. Thank you. Ivana, please.
Thank you, Dragica. I also, before we start, let me welcome you all to the fourth day of our spring school. I always have intention to say summer school, and today it's so hot that it's really like a summer. But anyway, today we should go further, and we should concentrate on our profession, on legal profession, and how what we did so far reflects in court judgments. But before we go with my presentation, which will be focused on gender biases or stereotypes in court decisions, I would like to return to something that we discussed yesterday, and I'm really sorry not to see Mladen present today, because you know that yesterday we had a discussion between some very harmful practices, and we spoke about the female genital mutilation and also about the circumcision that he raised as an issue. And you remember that we agreed that he will do some kind of research to present and to compare these two harmful practices. In a way, he said something which is really reasonable, and I agree with that we as lawyers should not make conclusions just relying on some statistics and some unreliable data. And what he said, he promised to do the research, but his own research, and he said that he will refer to the Ministry of Health. So I suppose it may be not at the end of this school, but at some point we will have his presentation, and then we can open the discussion on that issue. I think that we all, and it's really important because some of you also who were online put it in the chat that it shouldn't be a single-minded school, and that's right. And it's really easy to put a label on something that we are doing, and basically this is what we are discussing in this session. But it's not an excuse, but an explanation that what we covered so far are international. First of all, international sources, and today also we will cover international cases. So we will not today deal with some national legislation. Why it is relevant? You remember that on our first class, we spoke about one specific instrument that we have at the UN, and this is the CEDAW, or Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. What I told you at that moment was that it is asymmetrical approach to protection, which means that only women are recognized as those who can be victims of discrimination and can bring the claim. It's not the same with the European Court of Human Rights, for example, when we have a symmetrical approach. For example, Article 14 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which is the main provision. We have another one, but this one is really, so far, was the primary source of dealing with these cases. We have a lot of cases which were brought by men as well, in some very interesting cases. However, today also you will see that majority of these court decisions will rely on women's perspective, women's position in court judgments. Why it is so? Because simply CEDAW was less reluctant than the European Court of Human Rights to recognize the harmful use of and harmful existence of stereotypes in court decisions. So we expect that in some times to come we will have more jurisprudence by the European Court of Human Rights. But it's really important to say so, because otherwise the interpretation of what we are doing is only one-minded, and it was not the purpose of this call. So let's just return now to this practice that we mentioned yesterday. And I'm really sorry that this research was really a very short research, as I didn't have more time to present it. But I think that this comparison gives us a good and very solid basis why we spoke yesterday about female genital mutilation. And here, first of all, you have a definition, very short definition about practices. So for FGM, it comprises all procedures that involve partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. So it is simply very important to underline that there is no medical reason why this intervention has been performed. We have different types, and of course not all of them are equally harmful to women, but all of them are harmful, and there is no doubt about it. When we see the circumcision, we see that it's a surgical removal of the skin covering the tip of the penis. And concerning the health benefits, there is no single reason why anyone would be exposed to FGM. When we compare it with circumcision, we see that sometimes it is needed, but also there are some other, let's say, issues which can be important here, and this is the reduction of the risk of certain sexually transmitted infections, easier hygiene, decreased risk of urinary tract infections, prevention of penile problems, decreased risk of penile cancer. So it's obvious that we have many medical reasons, preventive medical reasons why someone will perform this intervention. When we take a look about the target group, we see we don't have exact number for any of these because it's really hard to obtain it. But we see that for FGM, we have like 30 countries in Africa, Middle East, and Asia, and we see some estimate of how many women and girls, primarily girls, are affected by this intervention. Of course, now we know that we have a lot of them who are exposed to this treatment in Europe as well, because we discussed it yesterday that we have migration population which continues to do so. When we compare it with circumcision, we see that it's obviously also a religious issue still, because many Jewish and Islamic families are doing that, as well as certain Aboriginal tribes in Africa and Australia. So who is the target group when we take a look into the age? These are, for the first FGM girls, usually up to 15 years and never as infants, while here we have mostly infants, but at the same time circumcision can be done at any age, but it's also very important that we have this comparison. Why with babies, they don't remember, it's not in a religious act, while with girls, they have enough years to remember the whole the whole intervention. And you remembered yesterday that we also said that we always have witnesses who witness what happened. Then, what are the reasons for the practice? And it's, again, important. We said that for circumcision, we have some medical reasons, but also we need to be open that it is also a religious ritual, because we've seen that it is present among some religious groups, that it is a matter of family tradition, a matter of personal hygiene and preventive health care for all these medical reasons. When we compare it with FGM, what we see? We don't see, as we said, any medical reason, but we see strong social connection or acceptance by the society, which is a part of social culture. That means of preserving a girl of women's virginity, making the woman marriageable and enhancing a male sexual pleasure, and the practice has religious support, although no religious scripts prescribe the practice. And finally, we have side effects. I will not read all of them, but what you can see, it's a huge and a long list of side effects, whether immediate or long-lasting effects which are related to FGM. When we take a look of some serious medical side effects, we see that that is also very common, and 1 in 500 girls are dead due to this intervention. When we compare it with circumcision, we see that we have some side effects also. Sometimes it can be these can be serious side effects, but you see some estimates that up to 3% are only very serious side effects, and there are no estimates about that. However, there are some cases which are related with this, and sometimes that can also be unfortunately, the side effect, but not in these estimates and numbers like with FGM. So what we can conclude from this comparison? Can I ask you, the whole group, to do it for me? I mean, any volunteer who would like to, please.
Well, maybe we can find some excuses for circumcision, but there are no excuses for FGM.
It's a good point. Some other conclusions or reactions to what we did? Please.
Well, there is I guess, higher percentage of negative side effects and also life-lasting side effects, not to mention psychological trauma. So I guess that, yeah, this is, I guess, a more maybe serious issue, but I wouldn't be able to compare it because I don't have enough data for circumcision, unfortunately.
We don't have enough data. It was, as I said, a very quick let's say, presentation of different facts, and usually I really relied on different sources, but primarily on sources of the World Health Organization. And of course, we're really looking forward to some more thorough research on this issue. I just think that, as you said, we cannot find any excuse for FGM. Some excuses, yes, for circumcision. It does not mean that this practice should be should continue, and that we should not discuss whether it is harmful or not. So it's good that we raised that issue as well. Professor Dragica.
Just to add, maybe it's relevant or at least interesting for your comments and comments of the colleagues. So the main point of this procedure is sexual control of women. Extreme implementation of patriarchal matrix, in a sense, to reduce, obviously and finally, female body just to reproduction. Enjoyment, sexual pleasure, feeling of pleasure is only devoted to men and ensured to men in this way.
Thank you, Professor Vardinic, for this additional explanation. Okay, folks, now I think that we can go further, but it was a good introduction to what we should do today. First of all, you remember that we said that we are all stereotypes. So there is no single person in this room. And if I ask you, do you have stereotypes and prejudices? And if you say no, I know that there is a problem that you are not aware of your stereotypes and prejudices because there is no single person without them. The issue is whether we will recognize it and try to combat it, to work on it. And it's even more complicated when it comes to the legal profession. Why? We have some estimates, we have some researches, especially in the US, which shows that judges can be more biased than the general population. Do you have any explanation for that? Why? What can be the reason for that they are even sometimes more biased than the general population?
Perhaps it's a way of making the process of reaching a decision easier because it has a pre-evaluation of something which has to be deductively reached, and since they have a job to do and a conclusion to reach, I guess it's different from what usually people do when they're not judges. So I guess it makes it easier for them in a way, probably subconsciously, not. Yeah.
It's a good explanation, Seth.
Okay, we can add that the legal system it's conservative by its nature, and that facts of the legal education of judges certainly has a fair contribution to that practice.
Good point. Some other thoughts on this?
Well, maybe psychologically they have a lot of egoism with themselves.
Okay, interesting. Some other thoughts? Do you agree or disagree with this? I mean, all of you are right, especially in the process of making the decision is something which is really interesting, and we will see how it influences the court decision. But at the same time, judges are very, very educated. And if you have a high education, you have that perception that you know a lot. And usually you don't have that perspective that you should reconsider your thoughts. And also the legal tradition is basically a legal education and legal profession is very traditional, sometimes closed-minded, and not open so much, not susceptible to criticism, which is also another issue that can cause this statistic. But of course, it is really hard to say, who is more biased, but we see that judges can be biased, and this is what we will do today, going through some decisions and you will see how it can affect the reasoning of the court and also the result of the court decision.
Can I interrupt?
Sure. No, please go ahead.
It's an interesting topic, of course. What I think we should take into account is a slightly different perspective of the American society, American experience, and many of the literature, much of the literature which comes from that region, and Anglo-Saxon in general, so English and American, where actually legal studies are extremely expensive. So in order to become a judge, you need to be actually rich. And that is one of the reasons why it's the category of people who become judges have a slightly slanted, to put it in a mildly way, perspective of the society. Now, it doesn't mean that there are no problems on our side, but I would say they're of different nature, and I will also deal with them in my presentation on the culture as well. So I wanted just to make this input because I don't think when we read the literature, Anglo-Saxon literature, we don't take into account sufficiently that dimension, which we don't have here for many reasons. And in general, in Europe, we have many states which are welfare states, and we have also been a socialist state, so we have a tradition of enrolling a big amount of students into our faculties, which has its negative sides as well. So I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it was very valuable what you add, at it. And yes, you're right. You remember that yesterday when we discussed the composition of some international bodies, and you remember that we discussed what 3 judges of the ICJ, female judges, said. That Rosalind Higgins, who was very opposing the substantive gender equality, that she is very wealthy, that she went to some prestigious schools. So this is why we discussed yesterday on a very formal basis how many men and women we have in the bench. But we did not discuss how many women who are coming from some underrepresented groups, from some vulnerable groups, are also sitting in those benches. And this is exactly also what Professor Tanasie is referring to. And when we discuss the judgments, first of all, there is some kind of criticism on a feminist perspective, because there are judges claiming that they should be always neutral and objective. And now my question to you is, do you think that judges meaning to be objective does not mean that they should take into account certain perspective? And here we speak about the feminist perspective. What do you think? Does it mean that if we take into account a feminist perspective, that the judge is not objective and neutral? And he should be, because this is the explanation of what the judge what the judge does. I'm sorry. Any thought on this? Please.
Well, I think that when judges are trying to be objective, they need to take into account, if they are men, the feminist perspective, because they cannot possibly know the women's angle of what's happening in the society if they're not women. They can say, yes, we are educated, and fine, that's okay, but we have to take into account that women are suffering and that they, on the day-to-day level, have some experiences that you cannot possibly know about until you are women. So you have to take that into account in order to be objective. So that's not being subjective.
Very good. Please.
Well, obviously it's one tiny, subtle, manipulative trick to be blind for differences.
Good point. I think that we also have some comments in the chat box. Is there anyone maybe who is online who can help us? Or if not, then I'll stop the presentation and then we will see what our colleagues who are online discuss on this issue. Okay, so we have from Larissa the comment that first we need to explain what we consider under the word objective. After postmodern turn, it is impossible to talk about objectivity. Judges need to take into account different perspectives and intersectional perspectives as well as each individual case. Do you agree with what Larissa put very nicely? Please.
Yes, actually, very much. I think postmodernism is giving a hard time to feminism in some sense, because these days it's going viral, the way of destroying every scientific reality and objectivity. And I heard in news that even mathematics can be sexist or fascist, or I mean, it's going crazy.
Please, Etin.
I just wanted to add that they claim objectivity, but they have their own perspective, which can be patriarchal and conservative. They are not subjective as they claim. They have their unconscious biases or disconnected with that conservative ideologies.
It's also a good point, because in order to be objective, you need to take into account, you need to know what are the experiences of others. Because if you do not rely on that, then the result of the case would not be objectivity, but you will be subjective, and the result will be unjust. And you will see it from the judgments that we will discuss today. And it's really important that we have different interpretations on what is good judging and what is the soul of a judgment. And of course that we always rely on the facts of the case. But sometimes even if you don't have a good fact finding, if you don't know what to look, what to search, your questions during the interview would be as such that you are not objective and you claim that you should be objective. So before we go into the details and discuss these judgments and decisions, you remember that on a very first or a second day or first day of our gathering, we started to discuss what causes inequality. And here it's a question to you because we already named it. These are stereotypes and prejudices. But the question is, do we really know what are stereotypes and prejudices? And it is important to understand that why I said that we all have biases. There is no person in this room who is non-biased. This is because you see this cat, she doesn't like a day like this, although I'm not sure whether it is warm anymore or it's humid. But what are the attitudes? Attitudes are, as you can see, a stable emotional tendency to respond consistently to some object, to some situation, to some person, to some category of people. And they can be positive and negative. So it's not only that they're negative. It really depends on what are the attitudes about. But what's the role of attitudes? What do they serve? They serve, first of all, that we easily survive. Do you know what is the amount of information that we are receiving for only one day, today, in a current world, in a modern world? A lot, quite a lot. Can we compare it with just to be aware of the amount of information that we are getting? Any guess, Sofia?
Well, compared to a human being around 2 centuries ago, it would be a whole lifetime of information.
Exactly. So can you imagine that we have this comparison that people in medieval times, they received this amount of information for their whole life. And this is only our one day receiver of informations. So what we are doing with those information, some of them are conscious, some of them are subconscious, because we cannot receive all of them. And of course that we will need to have some drivers in order that they jump in at some point. But what they serve first of all that we understand the situation better. We are getting information about the situations, about our current world, and so on and so forth, and how we are receiving those information. What is the transmitter for those information? Mobiles, computers. Sophia is so busy today, so computers again.
Well, usually we consume information, so meaning there is a high lack of dividing important infos and unimportant, so we just grab it all together.
Yeah, we grab them, that's for sure. But how what are the sources of our information? Yes, media, other social networks, exactly, some other people. TV, okay, but when we say people, Svetlana, whom we refer to? Please just use the mic.
I mean, from your nearest culture, or people from you meet in daily life.
Some other thoughts? When we say people, yeah, people in this room are companions, our partners, our family members. So we have a lot of sources. And how much do we rely on our own experience? We don't know exactly how much, but we very much rely on the information and experience of other people. And also, if we get in touch into one person who, for example, belongs to a certain group, you remember that on a second day of our spring school, we had maybe he is online, so he can confirm that this is what he said. We had a colleague who said that he has a mother who works at university, and he explained his personal experience. And what he did with his personal experience, he interpreted in general terms. That, and you remember that the conclusion was that women are not so ambitious as men, because that was the individual experience. So what are the components of this attitude? So we have three components. One is cognitive. So this is when we are on the level of information. So how we are receiving all this information and how we are consciously or subconsciously trying to interpret those interpretation. So these are our thoughts and beliefs. Another one is an affective component. What does it mean? It means that what we think goes here to our heart. And it starts with certain emotions. So emotions can be negative or positive depending on what we think. If we think positive about certain group, about Roma, about Japanese, about women, then we have some good emotions about it. If we have negative stereotypes, then we will have negative emotions. And then we come to this third element, which is basically the action or behavior, and what happens in our thoughts and in our heart goes and appears as discrimination. So this is the path how it goes. And what are the functions of the attitude? So this is what I wanted to discuss with you yesterday. Do you think that for Mladen, yesterday, it was easy to be the one who is opposing the group? What do you think? Is it easy to be in the group if you think otherwise? No, so no single person in this group believes that it was easy task for him to do, but he was persistent because he really believes in what he presented to us. But usually, majority of people will not do what Mladen did. So this is why we can say that he was brave to oppose the whole group, the bunch of people. So why? Because first of all, I said that attitudes has a knowledge action function. What does it mean? To collect information and to battle adjust to the world. What do you think? And then we have this adjustment function. So it relates to what we speak about Mladen. So if the majority of group thinks something, we will adjust. We will hide between the group. We will not oppose the group. Even if we disagree, we will stay outside. What is ego defensive function? What do you think? Is there anyone who would like to try what would be the ego defensive function? Please.
Maybe we take opinion as a personal attack to ourselves, to our ego, so we defend it even more. A certain attitude or discrimination.
Excellent, because our group is always better than other, always, because we belong to that group. And what would be the value expressive function? What do you think? Certain?
Maybe it's moral.
Excuse me, can you just be more loud? Sorry.
Maybe it's about moral opinion. I don't know.
Okay.
Because we speak about
Values.
values.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Diana. Some other thoughts?
Maybe also sharing prescriptive thoughts instead of descriptive thoughts.
Can you explain it? I'm not sure that all the group understood what you said.
Meaning not, let's say, for example, not what is happening at the moment, instead of what should happen in the moment.
Good. Some other explanations? Is there any volunteer who would like to try further? So we will have floods very soon. These ego defensive and value expressive functions are very connected, and it means, as we said, that our group is always better than other, and that we will, even if we are aware that we are maybe not right, we will defend it as our value. And this is, for example, what you had in one research which was done in 2014 concerning the judges in Serbia. And when the interviewer asked judges, are they aware of those who discriminate parties? majority of them, some more than 50% said yes. And then the answer was who was exposed to discrimination. Mostly those were Roma people, from the perspective of those who were interviewed. And then the second question was, and what you did, what was your reaction about? And can you guess what majority of judges did? Nothing. Very good. So nothing. They just noticed what happened, but they didn't want to interfere because they are still defending the group of judges, which is, when we speak about the identity, we have different identities. And it is also important that we are like an onion. So if you peel the onion, there will be one to another identity. So we all have mix of identities. So one of our identities can also be a profession. And this is what we discuss today when we speak about legal profession. And here we come to these attitudes which are turned in causes of discrimination, which are stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination. And here, as we said, they can be, and it's really important to understand that they can be negative and positive as well. But the problem with stereotypes is that we have general notions about something, or about the quality, or about a certain group, and then we don't have that individualized approach in each case, which is necessary in order to avoid discrimination. We have different definition of what are gender stereotypes, and we on so many occasions mentioned descriptive and prescriptive. What's the name? I'm sorry. Nemanja. As Nemanja said on too many occasions, and I think that we will all remember these terms. But here there is one very, let's say, common definition given by two scholars, Rebecca Cook and Simon Cusack, in their very famous book, Gender Stereotyping. And they said that stereotypes are generalized views or preconceived ideas according to which individuals are categorized into particular gender groups, typically defined as women and men, and are arbitrarily assigned characteristics and roles determined and limited by their sex. And also they explained that there can be both descriptive and prescriptive. So what they meant by these two terms: descriptive in that members of a certain group are perceived to have the same attributes regardless of individual differences. So this is what I just explained. And prescriptive, as they set the parameters for what societies deem acceptable behavior. And all of these elements of stereotypes basically they influence the court decision, because this is what you will see later on in these judgments, that sometimes we have what we call ideal victim. So what we expect that someone who is attacked, for example, who is exposed to rape or some other crimes, would do in some normal situation. And if we have another reaction, then we will not recognize that we have rape or other harmful act. So we already discussed what is the role of the judiciary, and we know that this is the third branch. I think that Professor Marinkovic can discuss in greater detail what is the role of judges. But here, as I said, unfortunately, judges can be even more biased than the general population, and it is really a step further that we have some international bodies that acknowledge that, because for ages the issue of stereotypes, first of all, was not in the focus of international community, and even when discrimination and gender discrimination became important in international arena, gender stereotypes and stereotypes in court decisions were not so much. And here, for example, I gave you just the example of one study which was done in 2018. We had Andrea Miller. She is a psychologist from Illinois, and what she really wanted to do is to try to reveal this issue. So what she did, her methodology was that she took trial court judges and lay people and they had to make a decision on two hypothetical cases. As you can see, one involved the child custody and other workplace discrimination, and she gave them identical cases with identical case facts except for gender and race. So what is the result of this study? Is that decision-making in both cases was more affected by both the gender of the parties in the cases and their own gender ideology compared to lay people's. So she found that judges were more biased. And what are the results? First of all, the more judges in the custody case bought into traditional gender roles, for example, the more likely they were to award greater custody time to mothers over fathers. And this is when we discuss this gender equality issue, that the question of child custody is definitely the one of the areas where court bias is very much present, but here not in the favor of men, but in the favor of women. And this is what she definitely revealed. And then in the employment discrimination case, men's cases were more likely to be dismissed out of hand and not have a chance to go to trial, while women's outcomes were more affected by the ideologies of the judges. So see, again, we have a workforce, and you remember that we said that the employment area is one of these areas where we have discrimination, where discrimination is very much present. And she also discovered that in these two areas, basically, the bias was very vivid, and that judges were more biased than the lay people. So when and what gave us a possibility to reveal the issue of gender stereotypes? You remember that we mentioned CEDAW, and with this convention, first of all, you remember that we said that we have a first definition of gender discrimination, which is provided, which is given by this convention. Here also we have two additional articles which are extremely important and which prescribes what are the obligations on the part of the state when it comes to gender equality. And first of all, Article 2 says that state parties condemn discrimination against women in all its forms, agree to pursue by all appropriate means and without delay a policy of eliminating discrimination against women, and to this end undertake all appropriate measures, including legislation to modify or abolish existing laws, regulations, customs, and practices which constitute discrimination against women. And then, in comparison with Article 2, we have Article 5, which also says that it is the requirement that states are obliged to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women with a view to achieving the elimination of prejudices and customary and all other practices which are based on the idea of the inferiority or the superiority of either of the sexes or on stereotyped roles for men and women. So what basically we get here? What are the requirements which derive from Article 2 and Article 5? Sreten.
Okay, we see that they have to do a full-scale job. They have to create a platform for eliminating discrimination by changing all that's needed, like legislation, regulation, and to change the social context, cultural practices that endorse discrimination.
Good. So basically, do we have any other interpretation of these two articles, Nemanja?
Well, there is a chance to fight against reachable opponents and unreachable opponents, just like laws that in themselves they include discrimination of women.
Okay, we have a legislation which prescribes equality of both sexes. Is it enough? It is a first step, of course, because without the constitutional provision and legislation, which is adequate legislation, we will not achieve equality. But what is further? What are the other measures which are requested here?
Yes, it is good to have this on paper, and it's a first step, as you mentioned. But this Article 5 mentioned this modifying of social and cultural patterns, which is a very difficult process, and also I forgot what I have to say. Can I reflect on it, and then I will come back with overwhelmed today.
Definitely. So please go ahead.
This basically obliges states to have active participation in eliminating all patterns of gender inequality. So even some traditions or behaviors, attitudes, and that also requires states to have different programs, not only legal measures, but maybe some other policies that are not connected to the legal system. And it's also very useful if someone wants to like defend their rights in a way, because this is a wide article.
It's a very good point, but what are the concrete measures? So we are all aware and we all agree that legislation is not enough. So it's a first step. So what are the others? So we've heard some policy measures, yes. It's good to have some policy papers who address this issue through some actions and measures that need to be introduced. But what else we need to do in order to change this pattern, which is very deeply rooted in a tradition, in a culture, in a society? Tiana, please go ahead.
Maybe trying to make a positive measures of positive discrimination, trying to push employees with some positive measures like subventions when you're hiring the females or the sensitive groups of the females, for example. For example, when you have the woman who is above, who is older than 50, it's a very hard employment, let's say, type of employee, and it's not easy, and you can, as a state, give subvention to the employees to hire this type.
Very good, Tiana. So we can also have, and I would say that I would call them also policy measures, some kind of positive measures, measures which can be either a quota system or some kind of subventions, so some kind of subsidies in order to allow.
We don't hear you. You didn't turn on the microphone, Professor.
Thank you, Nina. Can you hear it now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm really sorry. So I said that Diana also named a lot of important measures which can be called as positive measures, either through quota system or through some subsidies, and they're also policy measures. Very good. So do we have any other? Okay, so we have also two here. And please, if anyone who is online wants to take part in a discussion, it's better at this point to use the mic.
Yes, well, I think that we should also consider talking to women, because I find very interesting that some studies show how women who are suffering discrimination don't really know that they are suffering discrimination, or they don't believe their own experience because they're taught otherwise. So many women who have some form of discrimination against themselves, they won't come forward and they won't say anything, because as a society we are taught that many forms of discrimination are not discrimination, that's just how it is, and that's not, you cannot justify discrimination by saying it's just how it is and that's normal, but we taught women that that's normal, so they don't even know that that's discrimination, or they're afraid.
It's also a good point. So I would say that what you said is awareness raising.
Sorry. So I agree with Mina in a way. So when we have problems like this, which are deeply rooted in the people's minds and shapes their view of the world, I would always go with education. So starting from the early age with girls and boys, since we are all aware that when we have like little boys, how they're showing their affection to some little girls, like with beating, like I hit her, I like her. So it's always good to start with like early age, and then in a year you will have a change.
It's a good point. We always forget about education, but education is a very powerful tool to do what is requested by Article 2 and Article 5. Anna, please go ahead. Okay, Nemanja?
And also media to have mercy.
I agree with you that media is also a powerful tool and that we need media in this.
Yes, that was, I wanted to say what Nina says about education and starting from the early age. For example, we have in the school, we have this saying, boy, don't cry like a girl. And there is a very good campaign, Don't Cry Like a Girl, how is a woman actually crying, or Don't Fight Like a Girl, something like that. So it's a very empowering, that campaign, and that should be done also in early age. And also media is portraying women in the media very, very in an unethical and very bad way. So that is also, and a lot of people are relying on that, and we see it also in this gender-based violence. When we have 18 femicide this year, we see that every one of them is in some way, we try to find a reason why the killer did that, what she did, and we are in some way justifying that. So in the media is doing that, so it is also important.
Thank you so much also for this intervention. It also brings me to one anecdote which was yes, can you just wait for a second and I'll give you the floor. It's okay? So one of my colleagues, she also deals with femicide, and she also did a lot of trainings for judges and for legal profession. And recently she went to Montenegro when she had a training on gender equality, and then judges that she trained, they said, "Oh, we are not biased. This is not a topic for us." And then she was in a way annoyed, by their attitude that they are not biased. And then she said, "Okay, for example, are you going to allow your boy to go to ballet?" And then one male judge, he said, "To ballet? Why he will go to ballet?" And he said, you want to show that we are biased. We are not biased. I even allowed my son to cry 3 times. So he even counted, how many times the boy cried. But it's also a good example of what we just said. Okay, so someone wanted to say something who is online. So please, whoever it is, go ahead.
Yes, I think we can stop this discrimination by giving a protective discrimination to the women. For example, maybe in the parliament giving some seats reserved specifically for the women. In the judiciary, we have seen that most of the countries even didn't have the main chief justice of any country, woman chief justice. Till now, many countries suffer that. Mostly are male judges. So I think one of the ways to eliminate this discrimination is giving important positions to the women in policy making, in deciding cases, judgments, having the chief justice as women. So I think this is one of the ways that women can put her voice and get involved in all those policy decisions.
Thank you, Prabrit, if I correctly pronounce your name. Sorry if I didn't. Okay, good.
I want to say something like in my city in Jaipur, we have the mayor of Rajasthan. That seat is fixed for women. Only women can be a mayor. So such provisions also reflect the ideas and views of women.
Okay, it's a good also example. Thank you so much. We already made some policy measures and the use of quota system, and you will also have, for those of you who opted for public law, you will also have a lecture exactly on that topic. So Valeria, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add that I think that we are all talking about the values, which are dominant in some type of society, in one specific society, because every law, every legal act is basically a reflection of the values, of the interests. And I mean, you can find in the literature a lot of research in a way that like the dominant, the ruling class, and the elite, like they are the ones who implement their values in laws, and we can think more about the minorities and the other social groups who can also implement their values. So I think like the basic step, the main step is like this cultural part. I think that Professor Atanasi will talk more on this issue, and I maybe share this opinion a lot because I think that everything starts with the culture, with the change of our beliefs, perception, and attitudes, and then I think it's a little bit easier than to change policies and like the social structures after this. So thank you.
Exactly, and thank you so much for this intervention, which is very valuable. You're all right, and I think that what we named are all the elements, the policies that state needs to do. So a great job to do, and simultaneously. So we cannot one without each other. We cannot, if we do not have support from education and from media, to also, as Valeria pointed rightly, to have good policies. But then when we have discrimination, and when discrimination happens in a society, and then when we have a victim of discrimination, and she uses a lot of mechanisms which are, let's say, a disposal to that person, what happens then? And why some of these victims can withdraw the decision to go to court, for example. We will see why, as I will stop here. With this discussion that we had, and I think that it's a good let's say introduction to what Professor Marinkovic will do with you, and then after the break we will continue with some core decisions in order for you that this is more illustrative for you to see how it can be detrimental, and then we will discuss some feminist projects around the world to see how this idea emerged and what are the results of this project. So thank you so much for your attention and for your participation, and now I give the floor to my dear colleague, Professor Marinkovic.